Hello and welcome to Remote Considerations. I'm Daniel, and this is the first in what I'm hoping will become a series of videos called Talk About, where I'm just going to have a conversation with whoever shows up to hear it about whatever's going on in the world of video games at the time. This being the first in the series, it's going to be pretty awkward. I don't have any title cards or music or anything to that effect because frankly I'm still learning how to do this, but I just wanted to get this video out there. So let's go ahead and get into it. Just a couple days ago, it came out right after the State of Play where they announced The Last of Us Part 2's release date that The Last of Us Part 2 will not have a multiplayer mode. And this has turned out to be an extremely divisive decision because on one hand, people are saying that this is great, it's going to allow the team to focus entirely on the single player and make it just the best game that it can possibly be. And on the other hand, people are saying that this devalues the game, that it cheapens the game to remove an aspect of it that existed in the first game. And I don't know that I fully agree with either side of the argument. I'm definitely more on the side saying that this is probably for the best. Because the people arguing that this will make the game better, I don't know that that's directly the case. Because the game comes out in 5 months. Realistically, there's not a whole lot that they can do to dramatically improve the game between now and then, even with these extra people added on. Maybe a little bit extra polish, a little bit extra, bug fixing, that sort of thing. But realistically, the people working on the multiplayer aspect of this game are probably being moved on to the multiplayer of another game because, when you hire people for a game studio, you hire them for specific reasons, right? And in fact, if you look at the Naughty Dog hiring, they are still currently hiring for people specifically proficient in creating and designing multiplayer modes. So clearly, Naughty Dog is still planning on doing something multiplayer, which is backed up by a post that they came out with shortly after announcing that there wouldn't be a multiplayer mode, in which they basically said, hey, we're still going to make a multiplayer, it's just not going to be in the game at launch. And the way that they said that kind of creeps me out a little bit because they almost say it in a way that implies that they're going to not just add it to the game, but like sell it as its own unique experience. And I really don't like that. To talk about the other side of the argument, I don't think it devalues the game to not have a multiplayer mode in it, even though there was a multiplayer in the first game. And the reason for that is because even in the first game, I know that the multiplayer had its fans, especially the factions mode, which was apparently very popular. But I don't think the multiplayer of that game is what people remember about it. When you talk to somebody about The Last of Us, the multiplayer isn't going to come up for a long time in that conversation. You're going to be talking about how amazing the story was and how the gameplay felt and how tense it was. And the multiplayer at the time that the first one came out, I remember people saying how much it felt tacked on and how unnecessary it felt. And I kind of agreed with them, not because it was bad, but because I just felt like it was unnecessary for the game. Like I didn't feel like it added anything. But the idea that they're going to take this thing out of the game so that they can sell it to you later, that feels really gross. That feels like something that an EA or an Activision would do, and people would be extremely upset about it. But at the same time, if they do that, which by no means have they said that they're going to sell it as a separate product, that's just the feeling that I get. But I feel like even if they did that, they'd get away with it. I feel like that's a real problem. Especially if you think about like the big picture, because what's something that people, console gamers specifically, have always complained about? It's paying to play online. You don't have to pay to play online on your PC. Why do you have to pay to play online on a console? And to a certain extent, I always felt that that was justified by the first party output of the company that created the console. So like if you pay for Xbox Live, you're getting the multiplayer of Halo, you're getting the multiplayer of Gears, and I don't think that that's great. I don't think that that's good, but I understand it. Like I understood that that was the business model that they were going for. But then I look at the first party lineup of PlayStation, and while it's been amazing, I don't think anyone's going to argue that it hasn't been. It does make me question, why would anybody pay for PSN? Because to my knowledge, all that you're getting from it at this point from PlayStation is the 2 free games a month. And I understand that that's pretty cool. Sometimes those games are really good, but at the same time, it's like I'm only going to enjoy maybe 4 or 5 of these games a year, and that does sort of pay for itself, but I could just go and get those games myself and play them when I want to, you know? When you look at the first party output of PlayStation, it's amazing. I don't think anyone's going to argue otherwise, but there aren't a whole lot of multiplayer modes. Killzone Shadowfall, obviously, at launch, but since then, not a whole lot. And so the remaining multiplayer offerings on PlayStation, on PS4, come from, your Call of Duties and your Battlefronts and that sort of thing, right? Games that PlayStation has absolutely no involvement in. And so it feels really weird to be paying PlayStation for the right to fully enjoy every aspect of a game that was made by EA or Activision, which is, I think, why Sony goes out and pursues these deals with Call of Duty. Like recently, they announced in the same state of play where they announced the Last of Us release date, they also announced that there's this special mode, this Spec Ops survival mode in the new Modern Warfare, that's going to be exclusive to PlayStation for a year, which, considering that Call of Duty is an annual franchise, basically means it's going to be exclusive to PlayStation until the next Call of Duty comes out, at which point most people are just going to buy the new Call of Duty and probably not go back and play it. So they have sort of purchased this multiplayer mode for themselves, but other than that, they didn't make it. So it still feels a little weird, and it's extra scummy to like take a third party multi-plat game and remove a piece of it for your own nefarious needs. Like, it's business, but it's gross business. And so to get back to the original conversation, this is a bigger issue for PlayStation than it is for The Last of Us. The Last of Us is still going to be an absolutely amazing game. The story is going to be top tier, probably one of the best of the generation. It's going to be in contention for Game of the Year 2020, without a doubt. This game is going to be one of the games that people look back at in this generation and they say, that was it. That was the game that defined this generation. And so Naughty Dog and Last of Us are fine. But I think PlayStation really needs to rethink a couple of things in regards to their online. I don't think it's right to ask people to pay for an online service when you put almost nothing into it. But that's just me. The other thing that I want to talk about, and it's sort of related, is on the same day as that state of play, there was an Inside Xbox where they announced that Project Xcloud is opening its beta mode, essentially, in October, which at the time I'm recording this is tomorrow. And there's still a lot of questions that we have about Project Xcloud. But the one that people always bring up is the pricing model. And I started trying to think of reasons why they wouldn't have announced the pricing model of it yet. The most obvious one is that they're trying to wait out and see what all these other streaming services are going to do exactly. Stadia, Apple Arcade, Google Arcade, or whatever that Google is calling their thing, so that they can make sure that theirs is at least a competitive price, if not a better pricing model than all of those, so that they can win the streaming wars. But then I started thinking bigger. But I started thinking about why they haven't announced this pricing model. And I thought, what if there is no pricing model? What if they're seeing the complaints that people have had about console gaming for the last 15, 20 years about this having to pay to play online thing. And Phil Spencer, having proven himself over and over again to be an extremely consumer-minded man, has thought of a way to not make you pay to play online, but still make you pay for Xbox Live. Do you see where I'm going with this? What if, and this is my theory, I think that at either XO19 or more likely E3 2020, because I feel like they're going to want to hold some of this really close to their chest so that PlayStation doesn't have enough time to react to it before the launch of the PS5. I think that they're going to pop this having to pay to play online aspect out of Xbox Live entirely. Just make it so that if you have an Xbox Live account, you can play online. Period. The end. But in order to maintain the value of Xbox Live and make it so that people still want to be a part of Xbox Live, they're going to replace it with Project Xcloud. And they might rebrand Xbox Live to be like Xcloud Live or Xbox Live Stream or something to that effect. But I think that this makes the most sense. And it would absolutely force Sony to do the same thing or be completely left behind. And when I say PlayStation's going to be left behind, I don't mean that PlayStation would lose the console war for next generation. I don't think that's the case. I just mean that I don't think that people would continue to pay for PSN. I think people would buy their multiplayer games on their Xbox or on their PC where they don't have to pay for online, where they don't have to pay to play online. And if PlayStation continues to just not put out multiplayer modes in their games, there's really no reason to pay for PSN. So they'd be kind of forced at that point to make it free just to compete, just so that people would actually buy these multiplayer games for their PlayStation 5. And I don't think that that's especially crazy. Xbox has been moving towards this very pro-consumer, play where you want sort of thing, and they've been almost merging their Windows 10 ecosystem with the Xbox ecosystem. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for one of those two things to have to pay additional money to play online when the Windows 10 guys don't. And I absolutely don't think that the consumers are the only people who think that. I think that Phil Spencer specifically has proven himself to be the kind of person who would make that decision. It would absolutely put more value into the Xbox ecosystem. It would get people looking at Xbox again in a way where it's like, I can't believe that it's taken this long for one of these major console manufacturers to make this decision. And it'd be really awkward for Nintendo, who just started doing this, but they'd figure it out. They're Nintendo. People buy Nintendo regardless. So these two different stories have sort of ended up being more related than I originally thought that they would be. But there you have it. Those are my thoughts. Let me know if you agree.